started, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. The topic of the webinar is optimizing MDS workflow, empower staff, and make smarter data-driven decisions. And so if that is not the webinar you signed up for, you're welcome to drop off. But if you're still curious, then stick around. I'm super excited. This has been a topic that's been very close to us for all of the great work that the team has done around this. And so we're excited to share a lot of our learnings. My name is Dennis Joseph. I'm the Senior Director leading the healthcare practice at Digital Scientists. Been in healthcare for way too long, almost 25 years. And the last few years has really been focused on value-based care and really driving optimization, leveraging technology in places like skilled nursing facilities, independent living, et cetera. And that said, I'm also excited to introduce Maria. She is joining us from our design group. So Maria, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Dennis. So thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and talk to the people who are listening today about optimizing MDS workflow. A little bit about me. I have a background in communication and service design, and I work at Digital Scientist as the design strategist and UX researcher. So if anyone's scratching their head and saying, like, what might that be? Very simply put, I'm the one responsible for asking a lot of questions to really uncover what different stakeholders need. And at DS, we've been focused a lot on what healthcare professionals need. So whether that's nurses, care teams, decision makers, we talk to them and really uncover how they interact with technology, how technology is interacting with them, what challenges they face within their systems, within the technology that works with them, and maybe what opportunities we can find to improve those experiences. So my goal really is to bridge that gap between technology and human needs, and ensure that the solutions we create at Digital Scientist are both effective and meaningful and are adopted well into different stakeholders' workflows. So today we're talking about the MDS one, but we have worked with others in the past.
That was very eloquent, Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
So
But
why don't we tell the audience, Dennis, why we're doing this webinar today?
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So why are we doing this webinar? When you think about it, I think the last piece of Maria's introduction was key, right? Which is, yes, you can create a lot of different pieces of technology, but it needs to be glued into the daily workflows of clinicians. And so when you think about technology, it really should be a nurse's or a clinician's sidekick, right? Not a stumbling block. And so as you think about the systems, the technologies, obviously a lot of conversation around AI, algorithms, there's remote patient monitoring devices or other devices. They all need to be working cohesively and really needs to fit into the workflow of a clinician or a nurse. And when everything fits, it just flows, right? Decision making gets sharper, compliance is not a headache anymore. You're complying as you go, and you've got confidence that you're in compliance. And most importantly, it allows you to put patient care front and center, which is what it always should be. So again, a lot of why we're doing this, and you can read through the slide, but it's really about reducing that burden from an administrative standpoint, improving care coordination, and also ensuring compliance and reimbursement is optimized.
So what we're really trying to get across, Dennis, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that when tech works with nurses or healthcare professionals, pretty much everybody wins.
That's exactly right. And so, nurses spend less time wrestling with clunky, hard to use software and more time doing what they're really good at, which is compassionate, data-driven care, especially in these locations and some of the locations that you and I have been to in skilled nursing facilities, that really should be the priority. And better workflows and better integration means better care, and that's really the goal, right?
Okay.
So a really quick blurb on who we are. We are digital scientists. We are a healthcare consulting and delivery firm. We essentially operationalize technology and AI inside the organization. And we use those words very deliberately, which is, yes, we do create software, we do create algorithms, but we operationalize it inside of real healthcare settings with real clinicians. And that takes a different skill set. We understand that, a technology is not a point solution, it is an ecosystem. And we like to operate in that way with patients and clinicians at the center. We stay accountable for the outcomes that we try to deliver for our clients. We know what it takes as you think about a transformative digital experience, right? It's not one or the other, it's all of it. It's about security and privacy. It's about making sure that your systems are integrated and they're talking to each other. It is about that experience when a nurse logs into that system. Are they seeing what they need to see quickly? Can they identify the exceptions and can they deal with those exceptions? And most importantly, can they spend the majority of the time actually focused on the patient? And so that experience is absolutely critical, sort of a true north in a lot of respects. And the other piece is you want to make sure that the platform that we create that houses all of these systems and technologies, that they are performing, right? And the engagement metrics, the reliability, the uptime, essentially on a given day when nurses are so busy, you don't want any blips in terms of availability of systems. And the other piece is the actual roadmap, right? Which is that platform needs to enable the roadmap of, hey, here's where we are, here's where we could be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and you want to be able to execute that roadmap. And so we know what it takes. We've done it many, many times. And so a few of those clients up there, and if you have any questions on these or others that have not been represented here, feel free to reach out to us. All right. Again, as I said, a lot to cover. A quick agenda. We're going to cover a quick recap from the past webinar. This webinar, we're going to talk a lot about journey map, and that may be a new terminology for some of you. It may be something that you may be quite familiar with. And so wherever you are in that journey, no pun intended, we will talk about all about journey maps and how do you actually map those workflows. And in this case, how did we use journey mapping to map the MDS workflow? We'll get into a little bit of a real case study in terms of some of the pain points and solutions that we've uncovered, that we've helped implement. But we'll back away from that and really talk about how do you translate a ton of these insights that comes out of a journey mapping exercise. How do you translate that into real solutions and how do you operationalize them? So recap from the last webinar, we talked a lot about leveraging AI and managing patient care in skilled nursing facilities. And so we talked about this concept of patient 360, which is how do you leverage AI specifically to pull a holistic view of the patient? And a lot of this view is if it's in structured note, that's great. But unfortunately, a lot of these views are in unstructured notes. And so when you think about diverse systems, structured, unstructured notes, a variety of patient records, AI definitely helps in terms of consolidating information through these diverse sources and really helps you um, build that unified view, longitudinal view of the patient, which is truly critical in driving this multidisciplinary care. You want to make sure that all of your teams, and we all know there's a lot of different teams with different skill sets who come together to take care of these patients. And so a patient 360 model keeps everybody in sync in terms of who is that patient and what is that holistic view of the patient so that they can do their best work. And the other big piece is we talked about how do you translate this patient 360 into sort of predictive insights? Can we flag potential complications? It's not a crystal ball, but there's a lot of science and data-backed information and insights that we can highlight as part of the workflow that really helps clinicians stay ahead, right? And really almost drive the outcomes and not be reactionary in terms of any care escalations or any complications. So if you're curious about the details of this webinar, again, it's posted on our website, but feel free to take a look. But if you cannot access it, please reach out. All right, so let's think about this, right? So we've been talking about systems, we've been talking about technologies, and let's say we've got the perfect software, we've got the perfect system, it's integrated, and you've got a nurse who's experienced, who knows exactly what he or she needs to do. What could possibly go wrong, right? And what we found is things do go wrong. And the one missing element in that is what the topic of this webinar is, which is workflows. It's the day in the life of, right? What we've realized is the smartest, most elegantly designed technologies and solutions fail if it doesn't fit in the day in the life of. And so understanding that day in the life of, understanding those workflows and mapping that to the technologies that we create and the integration that we create is super, super important. And how do you do that? Well, we're going to introduce this fantastic discipline called journey mapping, which a lot of best-in-class companies use. So that said, I'm going to pass it on to Maria because Maria, you're really the expert around this. So what is a journey map? Let's start there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about journey mapping. As I mentioned before, I'm the user experience researcher here at DS, digital scientist. And as that role that I have, I really focus on bringing a qualitative lens to quantitative patterns. So really understanding how we can drive value for different stakeholders. And we do this, one of the things we do very well is really immersing ourselves within, in this case, a healthcare system and the MDS process, but really immersing ourselves in what different stakeholders are doing and understanding their lived experiences, their pain points, and their needs. So when we think about a journey map, it's a tool that we can use to really capture and visualize those needs, those pain points, those actions that happen to be able to take on a process. So the one we're focusing on today is the MDS process, but it illustrates step by step what the user needs to do to achieve a goal. It also highlights the roles of other stakeholders that might be doing things simultaneously within this journey. And a great thing that a journey map does is really highlight if there are any challenges within that workflow, if there are any opportunities along the way to improve that workflow. So just very quickly and very briefly for Dennis and other people watching, how do we actually build a journey map? So what we do first is we go
Hey,
to,
Maria. So,
yes.
sorry, I'm going to interrupt. So that's a real picture, and you're
Oh
in
yeah,
it.
yes, that's me.
And so I'm curious. It only shows a snapshot of that sheet of paper. How long was that sheet of paper?
A sheet of paper, I think, was about 5 feet long. I'm I'm more
Yeah.
used to the metric system, Dennis. So
That's
it
okay,
was
because that looks incredibly complex, and it seemed like there
this
was
is
there
a
was
trick
a
question for me. It was 2 meters
method.
long, at
Yeah,
least.
there was a method to the madness, but that's what
There
it takes.
was,
I believe
there
you had a
was,
lot
and
of real clinicians there, right?
actually something I want to highlight from this picture is that Oh, we did do interviews before, mapping out this journey map. So as you can see, there are things that are actually printed on this journey map. So we had a pretty good sense of the patterns, the opportunities, the pain points that we discovered from having one-on-one interviews with nurses, with the care team, with regional providers. Um, and then we brought it into the office, and we had new MDS nurses. We had MDS travel nurses come in, and we started working with them. So when they saw this, they were actually really surprised, because we were able to actually visualize something that they do in their day to day. But for them, it was really easy to start to pinpoint, oh, this is a problem I have as well during this step of the MDS process. So you can see that there's actually like red sticky notes and yellow sticky notes on the journey map. So we made it like a collaborative workshop with the nurses, live. So that was actually a great way to use the journey map in our sessions with the MDS nurses.
Yeah, and one thing that stood out for me, because I heard this feedback after you guys did the session. One of the
Mhm.
feedback that I got was the MDS leader. She said this was also a good way of aligning her entire team on exactly what the process is today,
Yeah,
right? Some of these
yeah.
people get plugged into parts of the process, but they don't see the whole. And
Oh,
this allowed them to kind of see what the part that they play, how does that fit into the larger ecosystem of MDS, and how does that impact downstream, based on what they do upstream, and that in and of itself was a good grounding exercise for her team. Forget about all the pain points and the opportunities and the solutions that we came up with. It was just being aligned on what current state is was actually a huge benefit.
yeah. She was also able to show her leaders where exactly we were going to target once we found our pain points and our solutions, and how those goals mapped out to the whole company goals. So that was something that was really interesting to me as well, that she was able to take in the journey map and clearly show everybody else involved where we were going to target and what we were going to pinpoint.
Fantastic.
Um, so yeah, as I mentioned just before, we had those interviews, we mapped them out, and then we went back to the nurses and we worked on this collaboratively. That was really important because, of course, these nurses actually have the lived experience. So even though we become experts in the field and we really gather all these insights, having them be able to work with us collaboratively has been amazing. We found those patterns in the data, so the pain points and the opportunities. And we also mapped out what other stakeholders were doing simultaneously. So we weren't only concentrated on what the MDS nurse was doing, but we also wanted to understand what dietitians were doing, what physicians were doing, what the overall care team was doing. And this is really, really crucial, because we're mapping out something that's easy to follow in the whole ecosystem and not just pinpointing one user. And that's really important because we start to think of this process within a systems thinking lens. And we approach it as an ecosystem of players and not just understanding what individual contributors are doing. Um, so it really makes sure the journey map really makes sure that we're not designing pinpoint solutions, but we're really designing issues within a system and a system of solutions, that will improve the overall journey, once new technology has been added or once AI has been added to the way that they currently do the MDS. So we really want to show you what an actual full journey map looks like. So we want to show you a real case study.
Right.
Um,
Up.
so Dennis is going to pull that up. And just very briefly, I'm going to kind of walk you through from top to bottom, what you'll see here. So we kind of map out the phases. So of course, there's a pre-admission phase, there's a patient admissions, there's the ARD date that is selected, and then we have the MDS being performed. So we know that this isn't always linear. Sometimes a certain step within the MDS is performed 2 weeks in. For example, section G needs to change, or section M needs to change. But we mapped it out as lineal, and then we were able to see and experience real MDS nurses actually do their MDS, how it worked. Below the general phases, we mapped out the technology or the systems that they're using. So this is really important for us to pinpoint exactly what technology that they're using at a certain amount, at a certain time. Is this pain point maybe coming from a certain system, or is it something that's generally felt throughout the journey? Then we have what the patient is going through at each step of the way. And then, of course, we have the MDS nurses, whether they're travel or stationary MDS nurses at different skilled nursing facilities. We have the dietitian, the social worker, the therapy disciplines. We have the auditor, which is a stakeholder that plays a big, important role towards the end of the journey. Then we have external auditors, we have division VPs, and then we have the physicians or the MPs. Next, something that we really wanted to map out were the policies. So I know that we've talked to MDS nurses who have been doing this for 30, 40 years, Dennis. So they have those policies ingrained in their minds. They don't even need to look up these policies. They kind of know them by heart. But knowing these policies and how they interact with the journey map, it was super, super crucial for us when we were designing the new MDS resident summary.
And I would even say some of these policies were state specific and the
Yes,
regulations would update. And so even if you had 30 years of experience, you're always second guessing yourself because you don't know if you're still acting on the most recent rates or have they changed or are there other guidelines that have changed, which made it complex.
that is super important to highlight. Next, we have the pain points, which I've talked a lot about, because of course you really want to solve those pain points and all of them, but it's important to see like how big these pain points are, if they're reoccurring, what are they stopping within the process, and then opportunities. So what can we do to turn those pain points into wins for the stakeholders, whether it's all of them, whether it's a single one, or whether it's the whole business unit. And last, you can see some wins. So what is currently happening very well in this step that we don't want to remove? So that might sound a little counterintuitive, but it is very important that if something is working very well for the nurses or for, let's say, the VPs, we don't want to break that because why would we want to solve something that's already working very well? So how can we take that opportunity or take those wins and really integrate them into these new technologies? So yeah, that's a little bit about a journey map, or we wanted you all to see a real life journey map and what it kind of looks like and how we visually pinpoint everything.
I would just
Um,
add that just that very last piece where you have questions or unknowns. Uh,
mhm.
so it's at the bottom of the journey map. I felt
Oh
we
yeah,
had so many stickies in that section just because collectively there were so many unknowns and aspects of MDS that other people didn't know or I didn't have a clear idea of the logic or the regulation or the ideal process or what do you want the leader to do in case things like picking an ARD date, what's some guiding principles. And so identifying all of those questions and unknowns were important, and just getting them on the board, because then we could methodically go in and address those. And sometimes it led to some policy guidelines that had to be created, which made sure that all of the organizations were aligned.
Exactly. And I think journey mapping in general is just so crucial, Dennis, because it really ensures that we're not solving surface problems, but we're really addressing those root causes. Whether it's repetitive tasks or clarifying documentation needs. It's a way to see how the whole process works, and the real issues that MDS stakeholders are facing.
So
Okay.
I know we jumped right in, and for everybody's sake, obviously a lot of the boxes were emptied out for privacy reasons. Obviously, all of those boxes were filled for this for the actual case study that we were referring to, and there were a ton of insights, and we'll consolidate some of that and show you some of those insights in the upcoming slides. But that said, Maria, this was great, fantastic experience. I know you've executed this in multiple settings. So if I were to ask you to sort of take a few steps back and talk about what are some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to journey mapping, and what have you found that works, and things that don't work in terms of driving those insights?
Okay. Yeah, I can talk about that. So when creating an effective journey map, it isn't really about listing out all the steps or all the insights. It's about doing it thoroughly. And we want to avoid some common pitfalls. So there's definitely some do's and don'ts of journey mapping, to really drive value towards creating systems or products that really work for healthcare providers. So the first thing I want to point out is it's really important to involve real users throughout the process. So I could maybe talk to one nurse and map out a journey map, but that wouldn't really be honing in the whole experience for all the stakeholders of the MDS process. So very important that it's rooted in reality and not assumptions. And the more stakeholders you can involve to gather their direct input, the better you're going to understand the full lens of what's going on day to day and how nurses are tackling processes like MDS. So it would really reflect a true experience, the true needs and frustrations of the users. Next, kind of similar to the one before, you want to map the ecosystem, not just one player. So the MDS process doesn't happen in isolation. It isn't one nurse going through section A to section GG. It involves a lot of key players, and it's a broader system with a lot of people involved. So include those people, include the different perspectives. Certain parts of the process might be more frustrating for a dietitian, for example, versus the nurse. So what can you do to make sure everyone starts to collaborate or starts to have a process or a system in place that makes the full experience for everyone a better suited one for everybody. Next, focus on those pain points and opportunities. Make sure that they're clear, that they're actionable pain points. It wouldn't be optimal just to list out that a pain point is like maybe EHRs don't communicate to each other, but what can we do with that pain point? So make sure you have those opportunities listed out as well. And yeah, that's really, really important. And then some things to avoid, Dennis. First, do not treat your journey map as a static document. As the MDS process changes or maybe new integrations are adopted, make sure that this workflow is updated and doesn't lose its relevancy or doesn't become outdated. They're not just artifacts, they're tools of collaboration. So as you saw in the picture, everyone pitched in what's going on, and I'm sure that the leader of this project, if she sees maybe a section changes because of a state law, she could update it very quickly. So there's always going to be more buy-in from others to have this updated. Sorry, there's going to be more buy-in if this is a system or a tool that is updated versus something that's just lost in the past. Do not skip the wins. So it's it's a common practice that maybe we want to only fix the problems. But we really want to make sure we highlight what's already working well and preserving those strengths. That's really important to address the weaknesses also. And do not forget to tie it back into the goals. So finally, make sure that once you have this journey map, you're able to look at it again and start to figure out, okay, these are all my pain points, but what is the larger goal of the company? How can I make this strategic moving forward? So yeah, that is very important to make sure that we get buy-in and we continue to improve compliance, streamline care transitions. And if your map doesn't align with these objectives, they risk really becoming irrelevant.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with all of these, Maria. I think it's oftentimes a difficult conversation in terms of the benefit of doing this, because
Mm-hmm.
when people bring us in, they immediately get to solutioning, right? Which is they want to solve this and say they want to solve that, and usually they have a hypothesis in terms of how they can solve it, and they may be 100% accurate, but we sort of take that discipline of kind of going back to, hey, let's make sure we're solving the right problem. And the other is that the only problem, or are there other problems that needs to be solved for the solution to work effectively? And
Yeah.
I feel the journey
Sometimes
mapping process.
when you're so into the problem or the
Right,
day-to-day of your work, you also see it very differently. And once you start involving more stakeholders, then kind of like a different light starts shining on the problems. Maybe some things that you were not expecting are going to come forward.
right.
Um, or maybe something that you thought was the biggest problem really isn't the biggest problem.
So speaking of which, in specifically in terms of MDS, the team was able to uncover a variety of pain points and solutions. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but just to highlight a few, I think the inability to compare data across systems was a really big bottleneck. And we also found inconsistencies with information as it relates to even things like clinical diagnosis information down to the ICD level between systems were different. And that really caused a lot of challenges in terms of how do you, one, identify which are the prioritized sort of um, ICD codes that needs to be put into the MDS submissions, but also what is the broader ecosystem of ICDs and HCC codes for that patient, where you need to have that awareness that, okay, here's the holistic view of that. So that was a big challenge. We found a lot of nurses driving decisions based on gut feel, or here's how I've done this for the past 25 years. There was a lot of that. And Maria talked about how a lot of these nurses had almost 30 years or more of experience, right? And so transitioning that decision from gut feel to really based on data was really a pain point. And there was no standardization across the board in terms of driving those decisions. The other is, a lot of times you think about not enough information being presented to the nurses to drive those decisions. We also found the flip of that, which is a lot of times there was too much information presented, and it was hard for them. They would walk in and they would open up their systems or their EHR or the other application that they may be using, and there's a ton of information on there. And so, where do you start, and what do you focus on? And so what we found out was a lot of critical exceptions, triggers, change in conditions were being missed because they were just looking at so many pieces of information. And so it was really hard for them to focus. And the other is, as you said, because of that, they were glazing over information and missing key changes that really should be part of that MDS. And so that led to us feeling good about, okay, I think we're capturing a lot of these issues and looking across the room and a lot of head nods, right? And that really allowed us to go, okay, we're solving the right problems. Now let's get into the solutions piece of it. And we executed a variety of solutions. Maria talked about this earlier, which is oftentimes it's not one solution or one piece of technology. It's a system of technologies, a system of solutions that needs to work with each other. And so when we think about those solutions, I'm going to show you just a few things. Again, this is um, probably some of the highlights of things that the team came up with as far as addressing some of the pain points. I'm not going to go through all of these. And if you're curious about any of these, please reach out. But I'm just going to touch on a few. When we talked about presenting too much information or the inability to compare information, having a good comprehensive resident summary was critically important. And we created a summary view that provided an easy to use area where nurses can go in and access a list of all of their current residents and their current health status. And when you pull up a specific resident, the nurse can actually click into a detailed page for that resident and review all of the current active diagnosis, health changes over time, any sort of active MDS opportunities. But they were singularly focused on that patient, and the view highlighted some of the things where the nurse had to take action on. And that really sort of was a huge step forward for them. Quality checks was the other big piece, which is oftentimes when they code an MDS, their biggest question is, did I code it correctly? And this was not only from nurses that were new into the profession, it also came from people who had decades of experience, which is even they were unsure whether they coded it correctly. And so doing a quality check where if the MDS that's already open within the EHR, to be able to go in and check on the coding, any sort of checklist, suggestions, recommendations, and to be able to synchronize that in with the EHR and almost prioritize those fields was hugely beneficial for them to have the confidence that they actually coded it correctly. QM triggers, that was another, I don't know how many days we spent solving that, but when you think about QM triggers, we provided them an ability where prior, during, and after the completion of an MDS, we gave them the ability to clearly see the QM, the quality measure triggers that may or may not be activated for a given resident. And the interesting thing here was obviously those QM triggers are different from different states. And so to make sure that those state level regulations were codified so that we were only surfacing the relevant ones was important. And we categorized those QM triggers based on potential, implied, or active. And that really helped the MDS nurses identify and prioritize their work. I could go on and on and on, but there's quite a few things in here. There was a lot of emphasis in creating what if decision-making tools. As you think about something as simple as an ARD date, right? The date that you pick for the ARD is hugely beneficial, and you want to get that patient started off on the right foot. And so all of the considerations to pick the right ARD date so that you're optimizing not just reimbursement, but how the MDSs operate going forward was really important. So we gave them a technique where they could pick a date and it would give them some data that'll then help them compare that date to another date to probably 3 or 4 dates to say, okay, which is the best ARD date to select for that patient and what's the most beneficial. So again, we can go through a lot of these solutions, but the way we prioritized it is really kind of put them up in terms of feasibility and impact. Ideally, you want to work on all of these and you want to get them launched right away. But we all know that's not reality. So when you think about translating insights into solutions, prioritizing that work is hugely important as against picking what's shiny, right? And so everybody's got their pet or their favorite solution. It could be, hey, if you can help me solve the quality measures, that's great. If you can help me identify exceptions, that's great. There was one nurse who was really passionate about the fact that, hey, if you can tell me where patients who had an indwelling catheter and they shouldn't have, if you can tell me that before I submit the MDS, I can go address that exception and really update the records, right? And so everybody had sort of their favorite solution. And what we did was we put up all of those solutions across impact and feasibility, right? So think of it like you're triaging something in the ER. You want to handle the critical cases first before getting to the minor aches and pains, right? And so categorizing these insights by severity, what's really a true blocker or a true or a major pain point versus a mild inconvenience was very, very important to prioritize. And of course, making sure that all of this was put against feasibility to go, okay, how fast can we roll something out? Once you identify those pain points, you want to turn them into really structured problem statements, right? It's one thing to say that the application is slow, and it's a whole other thing to say that our nurses struggle to access real-time patient data, delaying MDS submissions. Okay, that's a very defined problem statement. And so you want to make sure that you're solving the right problems first. Um, and sort of getting that agreement across the board. Hey, is this the problem statement that we are trying to solve? And once you do that, you essentially map those insights into user stories and also set up an acceptance criteria saying, hey, if we were to build this, what would be acceptable? What's accurate, right? And we had a lot of feedback from the clinicians around that in terms of acceptance criteria, which really made us focused in terms of what that story and what that feature needs to deliver. And finally, Maria, you like this collaboration cross-functionally and doing it very early. Bring everybody in, right? It's not you develop something and you throw it over the wall and then developers go and develop something and throw it over the wall and somebody goes and tests it and they say this does not work and they throw back over the wall. You want to make this as cross-functional as possible. You want to make this as transparent as possible. And the journey map really gets the entire team on the right foot. And we got to make sure that transparency and that alignment stays in place as we go through the process.
Making
Anything?
sure that the others on
Yeah.
the team really understand who we're designing for. I think something that always came up in the journey map and just talking to nurses overall is how OCD they are about the process. So if there is a small error, they are able to pick it up so quickly because they have these policies, they have these codes, they have so much information in their minds already. So really making sure that the whole team knows exactly who we're designing for, what steps, what moments, and being the advocate for all these stakeholders that are involved in this ecosystem is super important.
Exactly. All right. So believe it or not, we're sort of at the end of this webinar. Um, I think we went through a lot, but I feel like there's a lot more to share. But that said, I did want to do a quick recap, right? Which is a few highlights. Just the holistic understanding of workflow and stakeholders is critically important. And it's just not the holistic understanding of us, but for everybody's sake, right? The stakeholders might not have a holistic understanding of other stakeholders, right? People who are contributing to the process may not have a holistic understanding of that process itself. And so journey mapping really helps visualize that workflow start to end. start to finish, and you're really using that systems thinking approach. That's critically important. The other big piece is addressing the root cause, not just the symptoms, right? And one of the things that comes through in this entire process is a lot of people will say problems that they think are problems, but they're really symptoms of a deeper issue. And going into those problems and uncovering those inefficiencies and bottlenecks is super important at the root cause. The other is, again, you'll walk away with a lot of insights, a lot of opportunities, right? But how do you have a disciplined process to translate those insights into actionable solutions? How do you prioritize them? And how do you come up with a roadmap is super important. And finally, journey maps, they should be user driven. They need to be regularly updated, as Maria said. Organizations evolve, processes evolve, people evolve, and you want to make sure that you're capturing that evolution on that map, or some version of it. And the other is, as you think about this entire process of journey mapping, identifying pain points, translating those to solutions, and then implementing it, that's a pretty big leap forward if the organization is not used to doing it. And so do pilots, right? Do small pilots, bring somebody in for a portion of that process and go through this exercise and see the benefits, and then expand it to the broader use case. Before I jump forward, Maria, any other closing thoughts about this?
No, not on my side, Dennis. I've had a really good time today, just sharing about what we do, how we do it, and the benefits we have seen involving journey mapping in this process.
Perfect. I do want to remind everybody this is a webinar series focused on MDS, and we've completed 3 already. I can't believe it. We completed 3 already, and we went through some 3 pretty heavy hitting topics, and we've got 2 more left. And so the next one is about quality incentives and penalties. Yeah, that seems pretty daunting and feels like it's a universal problem. And so we'll dive right into quality incentives and how to maximize those, and how do you identify exceptions that leads to penalties? How do you identify them ahead of time and give your teams the time to resolve it before you submit the MDS to CMS? And so we'll jump right into that. And finally, obviously, a flavor of a lot of these topics is AI. And we realize there is a lot of buzz, a lot of talk, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion around AI. Our team has been operationalizing AI for a few years now, and we have a lot of bruises to talk about, but resulting in a lot of learnings. And so we'll walk us through our step-by-step guide in terms of how to integrate AI into your workflow and into your technology ecosystem so that it actually works. And it's not one of those point solutions that's sitting in its own island and your leadership expects you to use it, but nobody actually uses it. We've seen that a lot, if you can't tell. We'll walk you through a step-by-step approach in terms of how to effectively integrate AI.
That sounds great.
Please reach out if you have any questions. And obviously, this I think points to me, but if you want to specifically reach out to Maria, just let me know, and we can set up a call. We're happy to share a lot of the knowledge and learnings that we've learned, a lot of times the hard way in terms of implementing a variety of projects and working with a ton of clients. So I know we are way beyond our time. So what we'll do is we'll probably reach out. I know there are a few questions here. We'll probably reach out. I'm looking at the questions and it seems a little more involved. And so we'll reach back out to you individually addressing those questions. And we may also propose, if it's easier to chat, it may be good to get on a quick call and we can talk about our learnings. But that essentially brings us to the end of the webinar. This will be posted. And as I said, please reach out if you have any questions for either Maria or I. But Maria, it was great having you on this webinar. Thank you
No,
for
thank you.
all the pearls of wisdom.
Be happy to come back anytime.
Absolutely. I would love to have you back.
All
So
right. Thank you so
great. Well,
much.
thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of
Thank
the
you,
afternoon.
everyone.
Bye.